Well, hello. My techie skills seem to get lost along the way. Whatever I could do before, I'm not able to do now. I used to be able to make new pictures every day that I could put up as a thumbnail, but I can. I'm just gonna have to use the same one all the time from now on, I think. Anyhow, before we were so rudely interrupted, I was right in the middle of my psycho killer story, which I wish it was just a story. Well, no, I guess it's good that it happened. I had to go through it, I guess. But anyway, let's continue. Apologies again for the being cut off. Oh, shoot, I forgot to check and see exactly where it cut off. Um, okay, I'm gonna, at the risk of repeating myself, I'm gonna go back a little further than I think I need to. So, my hitchhiking partner always liked to ask people if she could drive. I wish she wouldn't do that, but she would always do that. And she talked him into it. We were at a gas station. She got on the driver's seat. I was going to sit at the passenger seat if he wanted to sit in the back, or I was going to sit in the back if he wanted the passenger seat. I figured he'd want the passenger seat, so I started to get in the back. But he was starting to follow me into the back. And I was like, no, no, I wasn't going to sit in the back with him. And that's when I saw his eyes change. It was like what I imagined when people talk about when they have a pet lion or tiger or something, and then one day the eyes change and they kill the person who's been feeding them and everything. It had that look. It was just like he had turned into a wild animal in his eyes. And so I did not relent. I was not going to sit in the back seat with him. And so he finally decided he'd rather sit in the back seat than the passenger seat. So he sat in the back and I sat in the passenger seat. And my hitchhiking partner, she's totally uh, she never notices anything like this. I always felt like I had to be the one to watch out for danger in all circumstances. But anyhow, that's what you get, especially for hitchhiking with somebody you don't even know. But what do you do? Okay, that's how it was. She was anyway. Um, so he got in the back seat. I was in the front seat, and I just happened to look in the right side rearview mirror, right when I could see him looking at me and then looking at her, and I could tell he didn't see me looking at him in the mirror. Looking at me and then looking at her and then looking behind him. And that's when I noticed it. I don't know if I'd noticed it before, but he had a long rifle on the dashboard part of the back seat of the Volkswagen, and a big knife. I saw him looking back at that and then looking back at me. Ah, that's when I realized Danger Will Robinson. Um, I didn't know what to do. At that time, there was a song that was really popular. I was really into all the songs that I liked that were all these 60s music and 70s. I just listened to them constantly. And I loved that song, My Sweet Lord, by George Harrison, which sometimes when he's singing it, it sounds like he's talking about the Almighty God of the Bible, and other times when he's singing it, it's like, no, no, he's talking about Krishna. Anyhow, I was in a total panic. I had no idea what to do or what to think or who to pray to or anything. And I started going under my breath very quietly, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Rama Rama. I think I was just trying to calm my mind down so I could think, because I'm really good in emergencies actually compared to what I've seen of other people. But you need to calm yourself down if you're really freaked out before you can even think. And then I realized, okay, this guy he wants to hurt us. How can I stop this? Well, we're total strangers to him. It's probably easier to hurt a total stranger than a friend. So I'm going to very casually and slowly, nonchalantly do my best to become friends with him really fast. Slowly and really fast. And that's what I did. I started, as we were driving along, I would, ask him questions like you might ask a new friend, and he would say things and I'd say things back, and I was just being very, just like, you know, somebody, who cared about him, cared about what he thought, and wanted to know who he was, kind of thing. And that made me feel a lot calmed down. And then after a while, he wanted to have the driver's position back. And so this time Jenny went in the back seat and he was in the driver's seat. And we continued on. And as we continued on, I don't remember much about our conversation. I can only remember the highlights, what I can remember now. And he was saying, well, I kind of hate to, it was starting to get dark and everything. I kind of hate to leave you girls out in the middle of nowhere, and you don't know anybody, and you don't have any money, and maybe I should drive you to Texas. And of course by then I knew I did not want to ride with him a long way. And I was like, oh, well, thank you, but we just really like to stop at the Denny's at our next place that we go. And we had already figured out that the next city that we would come to was Idaho Falls. And that's what we were on the way to. And he already knew our system in our hitchhiking was that every time we would land in a new town, it was usually a town we didn't know anyone, our policy was to always be dropped off at the Denny's. Because back then, Denny's were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. It was just kind of like how McDonald's is now, I guess. I don't know. They were just everywhere. And they were usually open 24/7. And back then, you could get enough food to live on for really cheap. I mean, it was like, I think if you got one scrambled egg was probably like 85 cents. And you could get a plate with maybe 2 scrambled eggs, a piece of toast, and I don't know what else for just a little over $1. I mean, it was just really cheap. And so for us, only having whatever money people happened to offer us, Denny's was the place to go. And we knew that we figured eggs were the best thing to get because they were not only cheap, but we didn't know much about health. But as it turned out, that they're high in protein, so that's, if you're going to have to live on something for a while, that wasn't so bad. And anyway, that's what we would always do. We'd get at the next Denny's and then figure out what we're going to do next. That was our great plan. So we were coming to Idaho Falls, and he kept saying, well, I don't know, I really think maybe I ought to take you further. And it was like, no, no, we really want to get off here. And for some reason, he decided to confess to us what he had been planning earlier, just before we got to Idaho Falls and the Denny's. It's probably 20 minutes before that. And he said, you know, earlier I was going to stop and rape Michele. And this was the first time that Jenny noticed that anything was wrong with this guy. And she just totally went, I wouldn't let you. And he said, oh, I've got a shotgun and a knife. I just shoot you, or, you know, there's no problem there. And she was just in the back seat, kind of falling apart. And he said, he said, well, I guess since I didn't do that, I'll go and expletive deleted a sheep. Oh, I don't think I had ever even heard of such a thing before that night. So that was really gross. And then we, as we were getting close to Denny's, he said, well, are you sure this is open 24/7? I think they might be closed. They might close at midnight, because at the time, I think it was getting close to midnight. Oh yeah, we think it'll be open, and don't worry about us. And we stop in the parking lot. He says, well, I'm going to come in with you girls, because I just don't know if the Denny's is going to stay open. I was like, oh, great. I was so hoping he would just drive away, but he didn't. So we sat in a booth. He sat on one side, and Jenny and I sat on the other side. And while we were sitting there, we looked at our menus and stuff, and he said, you know, I had this really sharp knife with me, and he brought it into the Denny's with him. He said, you want to see how sharp it is? And I said, no, I didn't. But he pulled it out, and he put out his arm. His arm was really hairy. And he took his knife, and he just slid it down his arm, and the hair just fell off. And I don't think I said anything to him at that. I just was thinking, oh man, we've got to get away from this guy. And the waitress came up, and we were giving our orders, and I asked, so how late are you open? And she said, I believe she said 1 o'clock. It was 1 o'clock. So disappointed, because it was already, I believe it was already after midnight at that point. And fortunately, thank you Jesus, he had to go to the bathroom. And while he was in the bathroom, I got the waitress to come over real quick. And I said, look, and I told her the story real quick, you know, how we're hitchhikers, and this guy's like a psycho killer. He was going to rape us, and he had this knife, and we're really scared, and we don't, do you know anybody who could let us sleep on their floor or something? Because what I'm going to do, and I said, and even if you don't, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you in front of him whether you have a place for us to stay. And please, even if you don't have a place, tell us that you do. And she said, okay. And then he came back to the table. And then she came back to the table after a while, and she said, well, we found, yeah, we have somebody that'll let you stay with them tonight. And I said, oh, great, thank you so much. And, we finished our whatever we were eating, and he left. Yeah, we were so glad. And then she came to the table and she said, "Well, we don't have a place for you to stay where anybody's living, but there's one of the waitresses here just moved out of a small house, and it has no furnishings except it still has a bed with a mattress on it that's totally stripped. There's no curtains, there's no furniture, and she you can't let the landlady know that you were there, so we can let you in, but we need you to leave as early as possible in the morning so no one sees that you had been there." And we thanked her profusely, and they gave us a ride in an overcrowded car to this little house. And we weren't to turn on the lights or anything. I don't know if the lights worked or not. We didn't try because we knew we weren't supposed to. And there were no curtains on any of the windows. The moon was out, so you could see out. And Jenny and I laid on that mattress to go to sleep. And I was thinking about, okay, how we need to get up early in the morning and leave, before the landlady finds out we were here. So I said to Jenny, "Well, if you wake up before I do, be sure and wake me up." And the only thing she had heard was, if you wake up. And she goes, "What do you mean, if I wake up?" And she was still very freaked out. I mean, anybody would be. I was still freaked out too, but I was just trying to I was in my emergency calm mode. And, for all we knew, he was stalking us. We just prayed that he wasn't, even though we didn't really pray. If I did pray, I don't remember, but I'm sure if there was a time to pray, that would have been one. So who knows, maybe I did. And anyway, woke up pretty early in the morning and left, locked the door, and continued hitchhiking. That ended my interest in hitchhiking. After that, we tried to find rides where we found them instead of they found us. Like, it would go in a parking lot of a big grocery store, and somebody who looked like nice people would say, "Hey," or, first we would look for Texas license plates, because we were in Idaho, and we thought, well, if they have a Texas license plate, maybe they're going to be going back to Texas. And my memory gets fuzzy after this. I'm not going to try to repeat it all, but we lived. We got out of that. We got all the way back to Austin, Texas. And what a relief that was. And then my hitchhiking partner started begging me to hitchhike with her up to Omaha, which is where her family lived. "So please, I don't want to hitchhike alone, and I need to get there." And she just kept begging me, and I said, "Okay, well," at that time there was a radio station in College Station, Texas, that would hook up people for rides. And so we tried to find a ride through that, and we did. A ride to Omaha. And we went up to Omaha. The guy was he was a very good gentleman. And I know I was trying to subtly seduce him, and he did not respond to that. I'm so proud of him, and I thank him so much, because that's how I had become. It was creepy. I had become such a creepy person and didn't even know it. But anyway, so we got to Omaha, and her family's house. Oh, one of the things she promised me, if you will hitchhike with me to Omaha, I promise you, I will either drive you myself to Denver, because that's, you know, I did want to get back to Denver. I was okay with that. She said, or my parents will give the money for you to take a bus to Denver. And she was sure that she could do one of those two things. And we got there, and after I was there a few days, she informed me that her parents were not willing to let her drive me to Denver, nor were they willing to pay for me to take a bus to Denver. And the only thing they were willing to do was to have me be dropped off to hitchhike. So I had to hitchhike by myself to Denver. I was still 17, so, you know, if a policeman stopped me, then I could be detained for whatever they do. And I just didn't, I had no conception of reality. Anyway, I wore like a men's t-shirt, tie-dye t-shirt with no bra. Of course, I was very, very small-breasted, and I thought that made it okay. And wore my faded jeans and my pouch around my waist. I did look very hippie-ish. And a policeman, sure enough, stopped me, I think just outside of Omaha. I thought, oh boy, here it comes. So I just went ahead and pulled out my driver's license to show him. And he saw me do that, and I was offering him my driver's license, and he didn't even look at it. He just said, hey, you know, what are you doing out here? Aren't you worried about hitchhiking by yourself? And I said, yeah, I don't really want to, but I'm just going to Denver, and then I don't want to ever hitchhike again. Whatever. He didn't look at my ID, so he didn't know I was under 18. He just let me go. And I got a ride with a guy who started asking me, so, when did you get into women's lib? And I didn't think of myself as somebody into women's lib. I was definitely acting like it, in the sense that I was definitely not being a biblical woman, let me just tell you that. And anyway, I tried to talk to him in such a way that we could be friends and that he could understand that I was not a women's libber, and hopefully he wouldn't, I was hoping he wouldn't try to hurt me or rape me or anything. And somehow I did. I made it to Denver. And back in Denver, oh, it was so weird. I saw one old friend from high school, and she didn't really have a place for me to stay, I think more than one night, and then I didn't know where I was going to stay, and I ended up at some party. And some of the people were older than me, and there was a guy there that said I could sleep, that, you know, I could sleep in his bedroom. And he ended up seducing me, and I ended up living there. It was a house with about 10 people. It was a 2-story house with lots of bedrooms, and most of the people there were older than me. I think I was definitely the youngest. And this guy that I ended up sleeping with there was 10 years older than me. excuse my telephone. Anyway, he was a garbage man as for a living because it was the only job he could get because he was an ex-convict, which I don't remember. He must have told me what he was in jail for, but whatever it was, I don't think he told me the truth. And he had been in a motorcycle gang called the Devil's Disciples. You know, here I was somebody who always tried to get away from devils and demons, but in his case, he just seemed like a harmless guy. He seemed like, he reminded me of that guy on F Troop that always had the hat. He was kind of the comic guy. I don't know. I just didn't feel as scared of him. And he was ultra aware that I was a minor. I wasn't 18 yet. And he did not want to go back to jail. So we never went out. He never took me out or anything, but he said he paid my rent. He paid for my rent, food, and clothes while I lived there. And he said, I want you to keep your job and save your money so that if you ever need to leave me, you'll be able to. Wow, that was really nice of him to say that and do that. And so I kept my job, which was, I think, working at a nursing home in the dining room. And it wasn't long before. And then I started discovering that every weekend there were people who would come over and he would shoot up, I think it was cocaine. And other people there would suggest that he give me some. And he would say, no, leave her alone. I think it was mostly just because I was 17. Thank goodness I was 17. And I had never really been around those kind of drugs much. I didn't know a whole lot about it. And then he started yelling out the name of his brother, his very good friend brother, that he and his brother were really close. And his brother lived there with his girlfriend, who was close to my age, Samantha. And when we were in our intimacy one night, he started yelling out her name. And that was really weird. And what else happened? It was, I think I just started realizing I really shouldn't be here. This is not good. He's into the cocaine and shooting up, and he's yelling out another lady's name who I know who she is, and it's his own brother's wife. And actually, I don't know if they were married yet. I don't think they were married yet, but they did marry later. And I just knew that I should leave. And the way I left him, I guess, was hurtful. I'm sure it was hurtful to him, and I'm sorry for that, but I left him on my birthday, and he had big plans to take me to the Ice Follies. He had tickets, and he was going to be so excited to be able to take me out legally. But while he was at work, I had someone come pick me up, and all the stuff I could carry and fit into the car. I didn't have that many things, and drove off and did not leave. I don't remember. I think I left a note just saying I wasn't coming back or something. I don't remember. And next thing I know, I'm meeting some other people, some people maybe I'd met before, and one of the guys there said, oh, well, you can stay at my place for free. I have an extra bedroom. And back in those days, people did a lot of crashing at different people's houses. That's what they called it, was crashing. And I took him up on it, and I still had my job, and I didn't have to pay rent. He was, I think he was a trust fund baby, and he was an unusual guy. He drove a hearse, and he was real proud of his hearse that he named Shadowfax. And There was no chemistry at all between me and him, on at least on my side, and so I lived there for a little while. But then there was a peeping Tom. It really scared me, and I went through a period where I got a letter from my stepmother saying, "How dare you, when you lived with us, you ran up the gas card we gave you to $75 and you never paid the money back." And back then, $75 was kind of like maybe $300 or $400 today. That was a lot of money. And it's true. I left out the fact my dad had given me his old car. It was a New Yorker Deluxe 59, and it was a gas guzzler. And that's I had that car for a little while, and that's how I was using up the gas. I would drive that car, and we would drive up into the mountains, and whatever. It was a nice car, and then a day came I just couldn't afford to drive it anymore, and I just parked it in front of my parents' house, and my dad ended up he had never put the title in my name, and he just went ahead and sold it. And anyhow, when I was living in that apartment where I had that car with me, the 5 Points, the scary part of town, it was a really scary part. You heard gunshots constantly. And so when I'd get out of my car, I'd always lock it and run to my apartment, the apartment I was staying at. And then whenever I'd leave to go to work or anything, I'd run to the car. I mean, I did not hang out on the street in that area. And then one day a big bulky guy came to their door, they told me later, and said, "You're moving out today." And they did. So anyway, I think I'm done with those stories, and wondering where I should be picking up at this point. Oh yeah, so I told you more about that whole thing with Michael, and there were so many things that happened over a short period of time. It's really hard to remember them, especially really well in order, but I'm doing my best. Okay, so then I was talking about, that's where I need to get back to. I was told you about this guy, at the time was known as Guru Maharaji. And he was 13 or 14 years old when I first learned about him, and from my friend Charlie, who had gone from being pesty to calm. I was so impressed. And so I had gotten to a point where I think somehow I made it back to Texas again, but then I was coming back to Denver because I was feeling that way that I mentioned earlier, 2 or 3 videos ago, like, God, I try to play by your rules and I just get kicked around. But I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't even know what his rules were. Anyway, I was hoping that psychic that I had read his book years earlier was telling the truth when he said that a young boy would come and lead us and be our savior in some way. So I thought, well, this guy is a boy, and he does say he's the source of peace in this world. So that's one of the things about people today call him Maharaji, or his, I think it's his driver's license name is Prem Rawat. They tend to use the name Prem Rawat more now. And anyhow, Maharaji's the name that he went by most of the time I was around him, so I'm just going to go call him that. Anyway, so I went to Denver specifically hoping that Maharaji could help me. And it was a particular time when he was about to visit Denver. And everybody was amazed because he was so young. And it's such a long trip from India and all of that. And I don't know, anyway, it was a big deal. It wasn't like he was always around. He usually just was in India and going to school and stuff. And so there was these how people had houses where they were letting people crash in their houses that were waiting for when Maharaji was going to come to town. And then there were all these people that at the time we called them Mahatmas, which they always told us in Hindi it means great soul. And these were people that were like, they didn't use this word, but they were people that were like disciples of Maharaji. They were his representatives. They were the ones he trusted the way that a Christian would trust one of Jesus's apostles. And several of them were there talking every night. And there were a couple of houses that people were living in called an ashram that people were dedicated to him and had given their lives for him. It was sort of like being in a monastic order, except it was co-ed. There were men and women in the ashrams, but not sex was not allowed. It was one particular building that I went to all the time where they had a very large room. We'd all sit on the floor, and then whoever it was, either one of the Mahatmas or one of the people that were Americans that had been with Maharaji already for a year or more, and they would talk, and they gave us a Hindi word for their talks, which meant that they were telling us the truth. And it's really weird because if I had known the Bible a little bit more than I did, and if I had been at all, defensive about Jesus, like wanting to defend him, there is no way I would have stuck around. But I allowed to listen to him put down the Bible. When Maharaji came, I got to hear him himself as well, and he would say things like, Jesus is dead, and right there, that was not true, but I didn't know that. I wasn't really cognizant, even though I'd accepted in my heart when I was 11. I already told you I had just switched over to the occult for my answers when I knew my dad didn't want me to be into Jesus, and very slowly over the years started just taking on my dad's attitude, which is that Jesus was just a nice man. And so I just didn't, when he would put down the Bible and say that Jesus was dead, I did not feel offended. And then if I had known the Bible, I would have realized, oh my gosh, he was constantly counterfeiting the verses in the Bible. He was always telling some of the same kind of stories, and he took things out of the Bible to make himself sound wise. And to somebody who didn't know the Bible, it'd be like, wow, I thought he was the first person to ever say different things he said, which I later read in the Bible. And anyhow, I was falling for it, hook, line, and sinker. And the only way at that time that you could become initiated into his, well, I'll call it a cult. They don't think of it as a cult, but I do. The only way you could be initiated into his cult was by one of his Mahatmas. And at that time, all of the Mahatmas were from India. They all wore saffron robes and most of them had bald heads, shaved bald heads, and strong accents. And they did, because there were so many people coming around from Maharaji being there, they were doing a lot of what they called knowledge sessions, and that was the initiation phase. And you had to have listened to them talk a certain amount of time in order for them to, they called it giving you knowledge, which now I think sounds very Gnostic, but I didn't know nothing back then. Anyway, they were there to give us knowledge, and it was going, and then I would remembered what Charlie said was that a man touched him and he experienced God, and that's what I was waiting for. I thought I was finding the way to God. And what people were saying was basically that Maharaji was the embodiment of God in this world. They were basically, they were setting him up like he was a fake Jesus, really. They just didn't use the word Jesus, but that's how he was introduced. And I didn't have a problem with that because I was too ignorant. And anyway, you had to have listened for quite a while, and so that you would be programmed enough to be thinking of Maharaji as, a god, or not just a god, but the Lord of the Universe was a phrase that people would use. There was a song they would sing sometimes saying, "The Lord of the Universe has come to us this day. And he's come to give us light, and he's come to give us love, and he's come to show us the way to our Father." See, that was just so obviously, he is and was, he keeps morphing into different things, but he was at that time very much an antichrist. But that went right past me. I did not realize any of that. And anyway, when we got to what they called the knowledge session, that's when they were going to do the initiation, where they would tell you that you would get 4 aspects. You would get light, music, word, and nectar. They don't even call it that anymore, but this is back in 1972. Yes, it was 1972. Summer 1972. And, but once you got into the knowledge session, they would still be hard on you. They wanted to make sure you should really be there. And so they'd ask you questions that would make you, whether you could stay or not. And one of the questions asked in my knowledge session, which had 2 Mahatmas in it, was, because there's a lot of us, maybe 30, 40 people, are you willing to let your head be cut off for Maharaji? Do you want the knowledge badly enough that you would let your head be cut off for him? And I had actually personally gotten to such an emotional state at this point. I so desperately wanted God. And I thought I was deceived into thinking he was an embodiment of God. And so I was like, yes, I would be willing to be beheaded for him. I had to say that in order to get knowledge. That's pretty weird, huh? Anyway, it's not like that today. They do it very differently today. I should mention, he was only 13 or 14, and he was a child of a bloodline which had been very satanic, in my view of what I know now. It had a whole line of people trying to play God, and his father before him had been worshipped by many, many people in India. And because of the work that I did when I lived in that ashram for 3 years, and the work that I did, I actually had the archives of some of the things he had said, his father, that was translated into English. And he too was, oh my gosh, he was playing up the Jesus thing even a lot more than Maharaji did, because Maharaji was being the little fat rich kid. He didn't care about that, but his father would be like the poor, the poor servant. And he wasn't really poor, but when he would go out to preach to people, he kind of played it up. I don't remember exactly how, but he made himself seem very ascetic. And he would tell people that things like he'd see a snake on the ground and say, "See that snake? He was a rich man in his last life." That was part of how he got money from people. Well, anyway, Maharaji was clearly programmed from a very young age to be in this position. And, you know, I believe he's a human being. I don't think he's a Nephilim. Don't worry if you don't know what a Nephilim is, we won't get into that. But I believe he could be saved, probably, because Jesus will save just about anybody who will submit to him. But I don't think Maharaji's capable of doing that. But who am I to know? I don't know. Only God knows people's hearts. But so I'm not judging him, because that's not what I'm here to do. But I am exposing him because he's leading a lot of people astray. And one of the reasons I think that people like him so much, because it's what I ended up liking him so much about after I moved out of the ashram. We were supposed to have moved in for life, but he changed his mind, and he started saying it ought to be more like a hospital, and then when you get better you move out. And that was the opening for me, and I moved out. And then not long after I moved out, I just didn't know. I wasn't sure I believed him anymore, and I knew too many things about him that just seemed hypocritical. And I just thought, well, I'm not going to worry about it. I just pictured a window in my mind. I threw him out the window, and I said, if it's mine, it'll come back, And I just went on with my life. There's not much to say about my time in the ashram that I can think of that would be important to mention right now, except for that it was just full-on idolatry, and I was working in the national headquarters in an office building called the Kittredge Building in downtown Denver, and then later that became the international headquarters for Maharaji's mission, is what he called it at first. At first it was called Divine Light Mission, and then the name of it got changed not long before I left into Divine United Organization, and then who knows how many names it's gone through, one or two more I think, and Elan Vital might be one of them. And then he ended up closing all the ashrams, and a lot of people felt very betrayed because they'd moved in for life, and now suddenly they're out on the streets and like, what are we supposed to do now? But anyway, that was the idolatry I had done, some real serious idolatry. And then I went on to, I had been told by the top people at a modeling agency in New York, I'd been told a few years earlier that they could use me if I lost weight. So I lost weight. I was already getting old. I was getting old for being a model, but I was hoping they'd let me in anyway, because at that point I was about 21. And I joined a modeling agency in Denver, and I took classes for high fashion modeling, and there, I ran into a lot of the stuff that happens in the entertainment industry and in the modeling industry. of the hypocrite, yeah, the hypocrisy. And I don't like lying to people. I mean, especially on purpose. I don't want to flatter people to get what I want. It just didn't feel right. And that actually, without me telling a long story, that's actually what it came down to. My agent telling me, we think that you could do really well, but we're worried that your religion is going to get in the way. And I didn't have a religion, but what he meant was because I was not willing to lie to people, flatter people so that they would uh, give me what that agency wanted. Tell him that you heard he was the very best photographer in the region, and things like that. And then some of that one that he wanted me to tell him that he wanted me to take photos nude, and I already knew that that would be a big mistake if I wanted to be with a New York modeling agency. So thank goodness I didn't do that. And anyway, some things happened. It was just, I couldn't live with the modeling world. And but I got real into being vain during that time. It's like everything was about how I looked. And I got model thin, or at least within 5 pounds of model thin, because back then you had to be pretty darn thin. And my legs were always considered too big for the people making those decisions. But I would look at myself in the mirror all the time. I'd spend like an hour every day putting on my makeup. I became a makeup artist. I taught other people how to, in the sense that same talent agency hired me to teach makeup, which I did for a while. And it was mostly teaching makeup to people who just wanted to look like a model, and they weren't necessarily in the program to become a model. And the agent would come in and visit the class and say, "Oh, Michele is the best makeup artist in the region." And I hated that. It was like, I don't know. It just, anyway, I'm so glad that I got out of that. And then when I got out of that, I didn't know many people except people who had lived in the ashram. So a couple other people who had moved out of the ashram and me, we got an apartment together. We didn't really know each other, and that was a little bit of a mistake. And then one of them moved out, and then the other one found another roommate to take her place, and it was a guy that was gay. And I didn't like being around gay stuff or anything, but I wasn't, I wasn't going to judge anybody about it. It was like he could be gay if he wanted to. It wasn't going to bother me. And so he moved in, and he had not lived in the ashram. And then the girl that I shared a bedroom with came home one day really happy. It's like, "Whoa, what are you so happy about?" And she said she was going to hairdressing school. And she, up until that point, actually, this is interesting, she only liked dating black guys, just like that girl I had known before. Isn't that funny? I don't know why, but anyway. And so she had this real way she'd talk, and everything was kind of like, kind of fit in with the soul sister thing. And, it didn't bother me. She and I were not on the same wavelength about things. We didn't have long conversations or anything, but it was fine as roommates. Anyway, she came home real happy one day, and it turned out, she told me the reason she was so happy is she realized that she had fallen in love with a girl with my name, Michele, at her hairdressing school, and that she had never realized it before, but that she was gay. And I guess she was waiting for me to be happy for her, and I was really surprised, but it did not make me happy. I mean, I wasn't gonna be mean to her about it or anything, but I was a little bit uncomfortable. I didn't really want to share, I didn't like the idea as much, sharing a bedroom with somebody that was gay and my same sex. So I think that was part of what also made me feel very somber. And so she could see that my response to her announcement was my being very somber. I mean, I'm glad you're happy. I didn't say anything mean or anything, but she could tell by my face and my countenance that I was not thrilled. And not long after that, I'd say within a few weeks, she and the other new roommate, the gay guy, had gotten together, and she said, we got together and we decided you should move out because we're gay and you're not. And so I moved out, and had another friend in Boulder, Colorado, that would let me come stay with her. I don't want to be talking about her private life, so I'm not going to say too much about it. Except for that didn't work out for very long. And I'm going to stop this video for right now because I need to search my memory to figure out which part comes next for part 8. So here, at least I finished the psycho killer story on the same day. I didn't want to leave you hanging for 24 hours on that one, and hopefully I went back far enough that it was before the battery died. So, oh, and by the way, it's really, really hard to find me on YouTube, and if you want to help me be able to be seen, from what I hear, it really helps if you'll give me a like, and especially too if you'll make a comment, even if it's nothing like, it could just be like, hi. I don't even care what the comment is, but just if you'll put a comment will really help me get this out to other people if you think it ought to go out to other people. And if you don't think so, then don't do it. And if you dislike my video, by all means, push that thumbs down button. I think that would help me too. Anyhow, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Holy Spirit, that you were still there waiting for me and ready to forgive me after 60 years of my screwing up over and over again. I have not gotten to the second time I came to Jesus yet. Okay. Talk to you later. Bye.